Jiho Park stood in the vast metal corridor and tried not to feel small. The walls around him stretched up so high that he could barely see the ceiling. Everything in this place was built for giants, not for humans like him. His black uniform felt tight as he walked toward the most important room in the galaxy. The Galactic Council station was bigger than any city on Earth. It floated in space around a planet called Nexus Prime, spinning slowly like a giant wheel. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went from its docking bays every hour. But most of those ships belonged to one race, the Saurians. Jiho had seen pictures of Saurians before, but seeing them in person was different. They were everywhere in the corridor, walking on two legs like humans but looking like giant lizards. Each one was at least 8 feet tall, with green and brown scales that caught the light. Their yellow eyes were sharp and cold. When they looked at Jiho, their mouths opened slightly to show rows of pointed teeth. 2 Saurian guards walked beside Jiho as he made his way to the council chamber. They did not speak to him. They did not need to. Their size said everything. Jiho was just a small human who needed watching. The council chamber doors were 30 feet tall and made of some kind of black metal that seemed to eat light. As they opened, Jiho heard voices inside, deep, hissing voices that spoke in the common galactic language. The sound made him think of snakes. Inside the chamber, hundreds of seats rose up in circles like an old theater. But these seats were huge, built for the 8-foot Saurians who filled most of them. At the center of it all sat the High Chancellor, Vextar. He was the biggest Saurian Jiho had ever seen, with darker scales and scars across his face that told of many battles. Vextar's yellow eyes found Jiho the moment he entered. The great lizard's mouth opened in what might have been a smile, but it looked more like a threat. "So," Vextar said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber, "the humans have finally sent someone to beg for a place at our table." Laughter filled the room. It was not a warm sound. The Saurians made a hissing noise when they laughed, like steam escaping from a broken pipe. Some of them stood up to get a better look at the small human who had dared to come before them. Jiho walked to the center of the chamber where a small platform waited. Every step felt like it took forever. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching. Him, studying him like he was some kind of strange animal. "I am Commander Jiho Park," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his chest. "I speak for the United Earth Colonies. We come before this council to request membership in the Galactic Alliance." More laughter. A Saurian, near the front row, stood up. This one was smaller than Vextar, but still twice Jiho's size. His name was Zethrim, and he served as the council's military advisor. "Look at this pathetic creature," Zethrim hissed. "Their entire species could not defeat a single Saurian battalion. What could they possibly offer us?" "They have some skill with mining," another Saurian called out. "We have found their labor useful for extracting minerals from their moon." "Yes," said a third, "and their planet has some interesting metals. Once we have taken what we need, perhaps we can find other uses for them." Jiho felt his hands tighten into fists, but he kept, his face calm. He had expected this. Earth's leaders had warned him that the Saurians looked down on humans. But hearing it in person was different than reading about it in reports. Vexatar raised one clawed hand, and the chamber fell silent. The High Chancellor leaned forward in his massive chair, studying Jiho like a scientist might study a bug. "The humans amuse me," Vextar said slowly. 50 years ago, they were stuck on their little world, fighting wars with chemical explosives and metal bullets. We gave them the gift of faster-than-light travel. We showed them the galaxy. And now, they think they deserve a seat among the great powers. The High Chancellor stood up, his full height making him look like a tower of scales and muscle. Very well, human. We will give you what you ask for. We will give you a seat. Jiho felt a moment of hope, but it died quickly when he saw the cruel smile on Vextar's face. Two smaller saurians dragged something into the chamber. It was a chair, but not like the massive seats that filled the room. This chair was tiny, made for a child. It was bright yellow plastic, the kind that might be found in a human kindergarten. They placed it at the very back of the chamber, in the corner where the shadows were deepest. "There," Vextar said, pointing at the small chair with one clawed finger. "Your seat at our table. Try not to fall off." The laughter that followed was louder than before. Some saurians stood up and pointed at the tiny chair. Others made jokes about humans and children. The sound echoed off the walls and seemed to go on forever. Jiho looked at the chair. It was an insult, and everyone in the room knew it. The saurians wanted him to get angry. They wanted him to shout and storm out so they could tell the galaxy that humans were too emotional and weak to handle. Galactic politics. Instead, Jiho walked to the back of the chamber. He sat down in the tiny yellow chair. His knees came up almost to his chest and his feet barely touched the floor. He looked ridiculous, and he knew it. But he did not leave. "I accept this seat," Jiho said quietly. "And I thank the Council for this opportunity to observe and learn." The laughter stopped. The saurians had expected anger, not acceptance. Vextar's eyes narrowed as he tried to understand what the human was doing. "You may observe, human," the High Chancellor said finally. "Perhaps in 1,000 years your species will evolve enough to matter." Jiho said nothing. He simply sat in his small chair and watched as the council began their daily business. Around him, the great powers of the galaxy made decisions that affected billions of lives. Trade agreements, military alliances, the fates of entire worlds, all decided by the giant lizards who towered over everything. From his tiny seat in the shadows, Jiho began to take notes. 3 weeks had passed since Jiho first sat in the yellow plastic chair. Every day he came to the council chamber and took his place in the shadows. The saurians had stopped laughing at him. Now they simply ignored him, which was exactly what he wanted. From his small seat, Jiho could see everything. He watched as the great lizards argued about trade routes and military positions. He listened as they made deals that would strip entire planets of their resources. Most importantly, he recorded everything. The device hidden in his uniform was smaller than a coin and completely silent. Every word spoken in the chamber was being sent back to Earth through a quantum communication link that the saurians did not know existed. They thought humans were too primitive to have such technology. They were wrong. During the lunch break, Jiho often walked through the station's corridors. The saurians paid no attention to him. To them, he was just furniture, something that existed but did not matter. This made him invisible, and invisible people could go anywhere. In the station's data center, a human woman worked as a maintenance technician. Her name was Jiwon Park, and she was Jiho's younger sister. The saurians had hired her because humans were good at fixing small, delicate machines that their large claws could not handle. They did not know that Jiwon was one of Earth's best intelligence officers. "The Council is planning something big," Jiho told his sister as she pretended to repair a computer terminal. "They keep talking about final resource extraction from human worlds." Jiwon's hands never stopped working, but her voice was tense. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 10 years. They want to strip mine Earth completely, then move all surviving humans to work camps on other worlds." Behind them, a Saurian guard walked past. Both humans kept working until he was gone. "The Prometheus mission needs to succeed," Jiwan whispered. "It's our only hope." Far from the council station, Captain Yuna Lee stood on the bridge of humanity's most advanced starship. The Prometheus was not like the slow cargo vessels that the Saurians had seen humans use. This ship was fast, silent, and invisible to most. Sensors. It had taken Earth's best scientists 20 years to build it using stolen and reverse-engineered Saurian technology. "Approaching the target coordinates," reported Lieutenant Somin Kang from the navigation station. "The Saurian patrol ship passed through this sector 6 hours ago. We should be clear." Yuna nodded. The Prometheus had been exploring the outer edges of known space for months, looking for something that most people thought was a myth. Technology left behind by the progenitors. The progenitors were the mystery of the galaxy. Millions of years ago, they had built machines and cities that made even Saurian technology look primitive. Then they had vanished, leaving behind only ruins and stories. The Saurians claimed they had destroyed all progenitor sites, but Yuna suspected this was a lie. "Captain," called Engineer Taiho Choi from his station, "I'm picking up some strange energy readings from the asteroid field ahead. It's not natural." On the main screen, the asteroid field looked normal, just floating rocks and ice. But the ship's sensors told a different story. Hidden among the asteroids was a structure made of materials that should not exist. "Take us in slowly," Yuna ordered. "Full stealth mode." As they moved closer, the structure became clear. It was a progenitor research station, perfectly preserved in the cold of space. Its black metal surface seemed to absorb light, making it almost invisible to normal sensors. "This is impossible," Taiho whispered. "The Saurians said they destroyed everything." "The Saurians say many things," Yuna replied. "Most of them are lies." Back on Earth, Dr. Minho Kim sat in his laboratory and studied the data that was streaming in from both the Council Station and the Prometheus. At 70 years old, he was one of the few humans who remembered life before the Saurians came. He had been a young scientist when the giant lizards first appeared in Earth's skies, offering technology and friendship. Most humans had been grateful. The Saurians shared their knowledge of faster-than-light travel and energy production. They helped Earth solve problems like pollution and overcrowding. In return, they asked only for mining rights to the moon and some asteroids, but Minho had been suspicious from the beginning. The Saurians never shared their best technology, only outdated versions of tools they no longer needed. They always had excuses for why humans could not visit certain parts of space. And they watched everything humanity did with their cold, calculating eyes. "They're studying us," Minho had told his colleagues 50 years ago, like scientists studying lab rats. Now, reading the reports from Jiho and the data from the Prometheus, Minho knew he had been right. The Saurians were not friends or teachers. They were farmers, and humanity was their crop. A young scientist named Dr. Hyeji Nam entered the laboratory carrying a data pad. She was part of Minho's secret research team, one of dozens of humans working to understand their true situation. The biological analysis is complete, she said. "We found something important about Saurian physiology." Minho looked up from his screens. "What did you discover?" "They're more vulnerable than they want us to believe. Their cold-blooded metabolism makes them slow in extreme temperatures, and their brain structure shows they have trouble with creative problem-solving. They're very logical, but they can't think outside established patterns. Interesting. What else? Their society is completely hierarchical. Orders flow from the top down, and lower-ranking Saurians never question their superiors. In a crisis, this could be a serious weakness. Minho smiled for the first time in weeks. Humanity had always been different from the Saurians. Humans were warm-blooded, quick to adapt, and naturally creative. They worked together as equals when necessary, not just as rulers and subjects. Keep studying, he told Hieji, and prepare the data for transmission to Captain Lee. On the Prometheus, Yuna and her crew had managed to dock with the progenitor station. The ancient airlock opened easily, as if it had been waiting for them. Inside, the corridors were filled with machines that hummed with power, despite being millions of years old. Taiho connected his equipment to a progenitor computer terminal. The alien interface was unlike anything he had ever seen, but somehow, it made sense to him. The symbols and patterns seemed to speak directly to his mind. "Captain," he said, his voice filled with excitement, "I think I understand how this works. The progenitors didn't just build machines. They built machines that think and learn, and I think they're still active. On the screen in front of him, ancient symbols began to move and change. The station was waking up, responding to the presence of minds that were curious and creative, rather than simply logical and controlling. Back in the council chamber, Jiho sat in his small yellow chair and watched as Vextar announced a new policy. All primitive species would be limited to one planet each. Their populations would be controlled, and their resources would be managed by the Galactic Council. The other Saurians hissed their approval. They saw this as efficient resource management. They did not see it as slavery, because to them, lesser species were just another type of resource to be harvested. Jiho made careful notes and transmitted everything to Earth. Soon, humanity would need to make a choice. They could accept their fate as slaves and victims, or they could fight back with the tools they were secretly building. In his small chair, in the shadows at the back of the chamber, Jiho decided that humanity would not go quietly into the darkness. Dr. Hieji Nam worked through the night in her secret laboratory beneath Seoul. Around her, dozens of screens showed data from across the galaxy. Biological scans of Saurians, psychological profiles, and detailed analysis of their technology. What she had discovered would change everything. "They're not as smart as they think they are," she told her assistant, Dr. Woo Jin Han. "Look at these brain scans." On the screen, a Saurian brain glowed in different colors. The logical reasoning centers were huge, much larger than in human brains. But other areas, the parts that handled creativity, imagination, and sudden insights, were tiny. "They can solve complex mathematical problems," Hieji explained, "but they can't think of new ways to approach those problems. When they face something unexpected, they freeze." Woojin studied the data. "What about their technology? Their ships are much more advanced than ours." "That's the strange part. Most of their technology is thousands of years old. They make small improvements over time, but they rarely invent anything truly new. I think they stole most of their best ideas from other species, including the progenitors." Meanwhile, on the Prometheus, Captain Yuna Lee and her crew had spent weeks exploring the ancient progenitor station. Engineer Taiho Choi had made breakthrough after breakthrough, understanding alien machines that had puzzled scientists for millions of years. "The key is not thinking like a Saurian," Taiho explained to the crew during their daily briefing. Saurians approach problems by breaking them down into logical steps. But progenitor technology responds to intuition and creative thinking. "Show them the weapons test," suggested Lieutenant Sumin Kang. Taiho smiled and activated a holographic display. On the screen, they could see a recording of their experiments with progenitor weapons. The ancient devices had refused to work when operated logically, following standard procedures. But when Taiho had simply imagined what he wanted the weapon to do, pictured it in his mind rather than calculating it, the machine had responded instantly. "It's like the technology reads our intentions," Taiho said. "The progenitors built machines that work with creative minds, not logical ones. That's probably why the Saurians could never fully understand their technology." Yuna nodded thoughtfully. "And why they've been so afraid of it. They destroyed progenitor sites not because the technology was dangerous, but because they couldn't control it." Back on the council station, Jiho had learned to read the patterns of Saurian behavior. Every day he watched from his small chair as the great lizards conducted their business. He had begun to notice things that even they didn't realize about themselves. The Saurians were creatures of strict routine. They always sat in the same seats, always spoke in the same order, always followed the same procedures. When something unexpected happened, it took them a long time to adjust. They would spend hours in debate, trying to fit new situations into old categories. Jiho also noticed that individual Saurians rarely disagreed with their superiors. High Chancellor Vexitar's word was law, and questioning him was unthinkable. This made their decision-making fast but inflexible. During one session, a minor crisis arose when a trade dispute broke out between two alien species. The Saurians spent 3 hours debating which of their existing trade laws applied to the situation. It never occurred to them to create a new solution. Jiho transmitted his observations to Earth. They are powerful but predictable. They rely on force and established procedures. They do not adapt well to unexpected situations. In the station's maintenance tunnels, Jiwon Park continued her work as a spy. She had planted listening devices throughout the facility and had gained access to several Saurian computer systems. What she discovered was both frightening and encouraging. The frightening part was a detailed plan called Operation Harvest. The Saurians intended to strip Earth of all valuable materials within the next 10 years. Humans would be relocated to prison planets where they would work as slaves in mines and factories. The plan was scheduled to begin in just 2 years. Thus, encouraging part was that the Saurians had almost no backup plans. They assumed everything would go according to schedule because it always had before. They had never faced serious resistance from a subject species. "They think we're helpless," Jiwon reported to her brother during one of their secret meetings. "They've classified humans as Category 7 compliant labor species. According to their files, we have no military capability and no potential for resistance." "Good," Jiho replied. "Let them keep thinking that." On Earth, the secret resistance was growing stronger every day. Admiral Dongwu Shin commanded a hidden fleet of ships built in asteroid mining facilities that the Saurians thought were just extracting metals. Each ship incorporated human engineering with stolen Saurian technology, creating vessels that were faster and more maneuverable than anything the lizards had seen. But the most important discovery came from Dr. Minho Kim's analysis of progenitor, data transmitted from the Prometheus. The ancient race had not simply vanished. They had ascended to a higher form of existence. Before leaving, they had scattered their technology throughout the galaxy, waiting for a species creative enough to use it properly. The Saurians found some progenitor machines, Minho explained to his research team, but they could only activate the simple ones. The really advanced technology requires a different kind of mind, one that can think in ways the progenitors intended. Young Lieutenant Nari Song, aboard the Prometheus, proved this theory when she successfully activated a progenitor communication array. Instead of trying to understand how it worked, she had simply sat quietly and thought about wanting to communicate with the ancient machines. The response was immediate. The progenitor AI spoke to her mind in concepts rather than words, showing her images of the galaxy's past and future. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the spread of life across the stars, and the potential for growth that existed in every species. But she also saw something that terrified her. The Saurians were not the galaxy's natural rulers. They were a mistake, a species that had gained power through aggression and fear rather than wisdom and cooperation. The progenitors had tried to guide them toward a better path, but the lizards had chosen domination instead. The AI showed me something important, Nari reported to Captain Yuna. The Saurians aren't supposed to be in charge. They're holding back the galaxy's natural development. The progenitors left their technology here for species like us, species that could use it to help others grow and learn. Back in the council chamber, High Chancellor Vextar was growing frustrated with a series of minor problems. A rebellion on a mining world had disrupted production schedules. Several subject species were asking difficult questions about their treaties, and worst of all, some of his own subordinates were beginning to suggest that their methods might need updating. "Order," Vextar hissed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "These problems require simple solutions. Increase security on the mining world. Restrict communications between subject species, and remind our subordinates that questioning established policy is not tolerated." From his small chair in the back, Jiho watched and recorded everything. The Saurians were becoming nervous, though they didn't fully understand why. Their rigid system was starting to crack under the pressure of a changing galaxy. Soon, humanity would be ready to show them just how much the galaxy could change. The alarms started screaming at Aero 300 station time. Jiho woke in his small quarters aboard the council station as red emergency lights flashed in the corridors. Through his tiny window, he could see something that made his blood run cold. Massive, black shapes moving between the stars. In the council chamber, panic filled the air. Saurians ran back and forth, their usual calm replaced by frantic hissing and clicking. High Chancellor Vextar stood at the center of the chaos, trying to maintain order as reports flooded in from across the Nexus system. Progenitor defense. "Systems have activated," announced General Korthax, the head of Saurian military forces. "Automated constructs are attacking all ships in the system. Our fleet is taking heavy damage." Jiho took his place in the small yellow chair and watched as the greatest military power in the galaxy fell apart before his eyes. The Saurians had encountered something they couldn't understand or control, and their rigid thinking was making everything worse. On the main display screen, images from the battle showed the truth. Enormous progenitor machines, each one the size of a city, had emerged from hidden locations throughout the system. They moved with impossible grace, their weapons tearing through Saurian ships like paper. The lizard's most advanced vessels couldn't even scratch the ancient constructs. "How is this possible?" demanded Counselor Zethrim. "We destroyed all progenitor sites in this system centuries ago." "Apparently not," Vextar replied, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Deploy all reserve fleets. Use heavy bombardment to destroy those machines." "Sir," General Korthax hesitated. Heavy bombardment has no effect. Our weapons cannot penetrate their defenses. The panic in the chamber grew worse. Several younger Saurians began suggesting retreat, but their elders shouted them down. The Saurian Empire had never retreated from anything. The very idea was unthinkable. Jiho activated his hidden communicator and sent a brief message to Earth. Progenitor defense is active. Saurians helpless. Recommend immediate fleet deployment. Far from the council station, Captain Yuna Lee received the signal aboard the Prometheus. Her ship was hidden in the shadow of a large asteroid, watching the battle unfold. The progenitor machines had not attacked them, perhaps recognizing that humans were different from the Saurians. "Captain," called Lieutenant Nari Song from the communication station. "I'm receiving signals from the progenitor constructs. They're trying to communicate." Yuna moved to Nari's station. "Can you understand them?" "I think so. It's the same type of communication I experienced at the research station. They're confused. They've been dormant for millions of years, and they woke up because they detected a threat to the galaxy's natural development." "The Saurians?" "Yes. The progenitors programmed these defenses to activate if any species tried to permanently suppress galactic evolution. The Saurian Empire has triggered their safeguards." Engineer Taiho Choi looked up from his console. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy buildup in the progenitor machines. If they continue at this rate, they'll destroy everything in the system, including the council station." Yuna made a quick decision. "Send a message to Admiral Shin. Tell him to bring the fleet, and prepare to transmit on all frequencies." The council chamber. The situation was getting desperate. Half the Saurian fleet had been destroyed, and the progenitor machines showed no signs of stopping. Worse, their weapons were disrupting all faster-than-light communication, trapping everyone in the system. High Chancellor Vextar's scales had turned a darker color, a sign of extreme stress in Saurians. His carefully controlled empire was falling apart, and his logical mind couldn't find a solution. "Perhaps," said a small voice from the back of the chamber, "you should consider asking for help." Every head turned toward Jiho. The human stood up from his tiny chair, looking impossibly small among the giant lizards. But his voice was calm and steady. "The human dares to speak?" hissed Counselor Zethrim. "You have no authority here." "No," Jiho agreed, "but I might have a solution." Vextar studied the human with his cold yellow eyes. Everything in his nature rebelled against accepting help from a lesser species. But his ships were dying, and his people were trapped. "Speak," the boy, High Chancellor said finally. "My people have been studying progenitor technology. We might be able to communicate with those machines. Perhaps we can convince them to stop their attack." The chamber erupted in angry hissing. Many Saurians demanded that Jiho be removed for his impertinence. But Vexatar raised a clawed hand for silence. "You claim humans can do what we cannot? We claim we can try. What do you have to lose?" Before Vextar could answer, the station shook as a massive explosion lit up the space outside. Another Saurian battleship had been destroyed. Time was running out. "Very well," Vextar said through clenched teeth. "Contact your people." Jiho activated, his communicator openly for the first time. "This is Commander Park to all human vessels. You are cleared for approach." The Saurians stared at him in shock. How did a primitive human have access to faster-than-light communication when their own systems were jammed? The answer came a few minutes later when ships began appearing on the edge of the system. But these were not the slow cargo vessels that the Saurians expected. These were sleek warships that moved with deadly grace, their hulls gleaming with technology that the lizards didn't recognize. Impossible, whispered General Korthax. Humans don't have military vessels. Apparently they do, Vextar replied, his voice filled with a new emotion. Uncertainty. Admiral Dongwu Shin's flagship, the Unity, led a fleet of 50 human vessels into the system. The ships moved in perfect coordination, their formation flowing like water around the massive progenitor constructs. The ancient machines paused in their attack, as if studying these new arrivals. On the Council Station's main screen, Admiral Shin's face appeared. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, but his voice carried absolute authority. This is Admiral Shin of the Human Defense Fleet. We are here to assist with the current crisis. Human Defense Fleet? Vexatar's voice cracked slightly. You told us you had no military forces. We told you what you expected to hear, Shin replied calmly. Now do you want our help or not? While the Saurians debated, Lieutenant Nari Song worked frantically aboard the Prometheus. She had established a communication link with the progenitor AI, and what she learned changed everything. The machines aren't trying to destroy everyone, she reported to Captain Yuna. They're trying to force a change in galactic leadership. The progenitors programmed them to activate when the galaxy's growth was being artificially suppressed. Can we stop them? Maybe. But only if the Saurians agree to give up their empire. Yuna smiled grimly. That's not going to happen voluntarily. Back in the council chamber, High Chancellor Vexatar was facing the worst crisis in Saurian history. His ships were powerless against the progenitor machines, and the humans he had dismissed as primitive and weak, held the key to survival. What do you want? He demanded of Jiho. Nothing you're prepared to give, Jiho replied. The progenitor machines will only stop if the galaxy returns to its natural path of development. That means ending the Saurian Empire's domination of other species. Never! Vextar roared. We will not surrender our rightful place as rulers. Then you'll die as rulers, Jiho said quietly. The choice is yours. Outside the station, the battle continued. But now it had taken on a different character. The human ships weren't fighting the progenitor machines. They were dancing with them, moving in patterns that seemed to calm the ancient constructs. Slowly, the massive weapons began to power down. The Saurians watched in amazement as creatures they had considered barely intelligent accomplished what their greatest minds could not. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They were not the superior species they had believed themselves to be. In his small yellow chair, Jiho waited for their answer. The council chamber fell silent as the progenitor machines powered down their weapons. Through the massive windows, everyone could see the human fleet moving in elegant formations around the ancient constructs. What had seemed impossible just hours before was happening. The crisis was ending without bloodshed. But High Chancellor Vexatar was not grateful. His yellow eyes burned with rage as he stared at the small human who still stood beside his tiny chair. You planned this, Vexatar hissed. This was all a trap. You activated those machines somehow. Jiho shook his head calmly. We had nothing to do with activating the progenitor defenses. Your own actions triggered them. We just knew how to communicate with them when they woke up. Lies! Counselor Zethram shouted. Humans are too primitive to understand progenitor technology. That's what you believed, Jiho replied. And that's why you're losing. On the main display screen, Admiral Shin's image watched the argument with patient eyes. Behind him, other human officers worked at stations filled with technology that The Saurians were only now beginning to recognize as advanced. "High Chancellor," Admiral Shin said, "my ships have successfully negotiated a temporary ceasefire with the progenitor systems. However, the ancient machines will only remain inactive if certain conditions are met." "What conditions?" Vextar demanded. "The immediate cessation of all forced resource extraction from inhabited worlds, the release of all enslaved populations, and the restructuring of the Galactic Council to include equal representation for all species." The chamber erupted in angry hissing. Every Saurian present understood what these demands meant: the end of their empire. "We will never surrender to primitives!" General Korthax roared. "Deploy the reserve fleets! Destroy those human ships!" "With what?" Admiral Shin asked quietly. "Your main battle fleet is gone. Your remaining ships are trapped in this system. And even if you could call for reinforcements, how would they get here? The progenitor machines are jamming all faster-than-light travel except for our own." "Vextars." Claws scraped against his chair's armrests. "How is that possible? How do you have FTL communication when we do not?" Jiho reached into his uniform and pulled out a small device. It was no bigger than a coin, but it glowed with soft blue light. "Progenitor technology," he said simply. "We've been using it for months. Every word spoken in this chamber has been transmitted across the galaxy. Every species you've enslaved knows exactly what you think of them." The blood drained from Vextar's face. If that was true, then rebellions would be starting on dozens of worlds. The Saurian Empire relied on keeping subject species isolated and ignorant. If they could communicate freely— "Impossible," Zethrim whispered. "Humans don't have the intelligence to understand progenitor systems." "That's where you made your biggest mistake," Jiho said, his voice growing stronger. "You assumed that intelligence meant thinking like you. But the progenitors built their technology for minds that could adapt, create, and cooperate. Minds like ours." From his station aboard the Unity, Admiral Shin activated another display. This one showed star charts from across the galaxy. Hundreds of worlds where subject species were rising up against their Saurian overlords. "The revolution began 3 hours ago," Shin explained. "Coordinated uprisings on every world where you've established resource extraction facilities. Your garrison forces are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. "This is treachery!" Vextar roared, rising from his massive chair. "We will crush these rebellions as we have crushed all others." "With what army?" Jiho asked. "Half your fleet is destroyed, the other half is trapped here, and your subject species now have access to progenitor technology too." As if to prove his point, the display showed images from a dozen different worlds. On each one, primitive mining equipment was being replaced by advanced progenitor machines that the local populations had somehow learned to operate. The Saurians' technological advantage was disappearing in real time. General Korthax activated his personal communicator and tried to contact military bases across the Empire. All he received was static. "Communications are being jammed," he reported, his voice hollow with shock. "Not jammed," Jiho corrected. "Redirected. Every military frequency you use is now being monitored and controlled by progenitor AI systems. Your orders aren't reaching your forces." Vexitar looked around the chamber at his fellow Saurians. For the first time in his life, he saw fear in their eyes. The empire they had built over centuries was crumbling in a matter of hours. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Jiho stood up straighter. He was still small compared to the giant lizards around him, but somehow he seemed to fill the entire chamber with his presence. We want what the progenitors wanted, a galaxy where every species can grow and develop according to its own nature. No more slavery, no more forced tribute, no more artificial suppression of technological and cultural advancement. And if we refuse, then the progenitor machines will complete their programming. They'll systematically dismantle every piece of Saurian military technology in the galaxy. Your empire will end anyway, but millions will die in the process. Vextar's mind raced through his options. He could try to fight, but his forces were trapped and outgunned. He could try to negotiate, but what did he have to offer? The humans already had superior technology and the support of most of the galaxy. You have 1 hour to decide, Admiral Shin said from the display screen. After that, the progenitor machines will resume their programming. As if summoned by his words, Lieutenant Narisong's voice came through the communication system. She was speaking from the Prometheus, where she maintained contact with the progenitor AI. The ancient systems are willing to give the Saurians a chance, she reported. They recognize that your species has potential for growth, but only if you abandon the path of domination. What does that mean? Zethrim demanded. It means you can keep your homeworld and your colonies, but you cannot rule over other species. You'll have 1 vote in the new Galactic Council, just like everyone else. The Saurians recoiled at the idea. They had been the dominant species for so long that equality seemed like defeat. But Jiho wasn't finished. He walked to the center of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the vast room. You gave humanity 1 small seat because you thought we were insignificant, he said. You looked at our size, our technology, our short history in space, and you decided we didn't matter. But you forgot something important about humans. He gestured toward the tiny yellow chair where he had sat for weeks. We've always been willing to start from the bottom and work our way up. We don't need to be the biggest, or the strongest, or the most logical. We just need to be persistent, creative, and willing to help each other. Jiho looked directly at Vextar. Your disgrace isn't that you underestimated us. Your disgrace is that you spent so long looking down on others that you forgot how to look up. You forgot how to grow. The High Chancellor's shoulders sagged. Around him, his counselors whispered among themselves in their hissing language. The empire they had built was ending, and they all knew it. We accept your terms, Vexatar said finally. Each word seemed to cause him physical pain. Jiho nodded. The new Galactic Council will convene in 6 months. Every species will send representatives, and the chambers will be redesigned so that all delegates sit as equals. He looked back at his small yellow chair 1 last time. That chair will remain here as a reminder. Sometimes the smallest voice can change everything if people are willing to listen. As news of the agreement spread across the galaxy, celebrations began on 1,000 worlds. Species that had been enslaved for generations were finally free. The age of Saurian domination was over. In the months that followed, the new Galactic Council would face many challenges. Building a democracy among dozens of different species was not easy. But with progenitor technology available to all, and with humans providing guidance on cooperation and adaptation, the galaxy began to heal. Years later, tourists from across the known worlds would visit the council chamber to see the small yellow chair that had changed history. They would stand where Jiho Park had stood and remember that courage doesn't require size or strength, only the willingness to speak truth to power. The chair remained empty, waiting for the next small voice that might need to be heard.